Welcome. Thank you so much for your time and for joining me today. I appreciate your interest in landscaping and gardening. My name is Kathleen Carr. I own a company called The Growing Scene, and today we're going to talk about a topic called maintaining your landscaping beds. Um, I wanted to start out with something a little bit, kind of on the humorous side. I included this meme on this particular slide. Normally, gardening can make some of us a little fussy, especially, when it's kind of 80 degrees or 90 degrees and hot and we're working on pulling weeds. This year, though, in our current situation with our current climate and the fact that we're all quarantining, gardening is actually, I think, making things a little bit more palatable. We enjoy, being outside when we can. And part of the things that we're able to do, we can't do a lot right now, but part of the things that we're able to do is really kind of working out in our yard. So I hope that you're able to come away with this discussion over the next 45 minutes with a couple of the things that you can just kind of jump right in and get out there and make a difference in your yard. This is an incredibly glamorous topic, and sometimes this presentation detailed, but I'll do my best to kind of add some insight along the way. Normally, I would be teaching this class, kind of the traditional standing up in front of a classroom and having a little bit more of an interaction with homeowners as I'm doing this. Again, as we're all kind of switching modes for these presentations, I'm honestly just kind of sitting at my desk, looking at a computer the same as you are, and speaking into a microphone. So I'll try to make it as interesting as possible, but I know, sometimes it can get a little bit dry. So to kind of get into the session that we're going to be talking about today, maintaining your landscaping. So as the landscape matures, there's kind of different types of maintenance that is required. If you take kind of the two opposite ends of the spectrum example, a landscape that has just been planted, say within the last 6 months, is going to need a different level of maintenance than compared to a landscaping that was planted 20 years ago. Maintenance also will vary chronologically throughout the seasons. What you might be doing in your yard in May is dramatically different from what you might be doing in your yard in October. So we're going to try to address both examples, kind of what you would do in April or November, and then include the various levels of maturity in your landscaping as well. The whole point of the class today is to really give you as much information as possible to make sure that you can help the plants that are growing in your yard really, flower to their best ability, or the shrubs certainly, grow kind of, maintaining certain heights or widths depending on what you're looking for. I had just another, funny meme to, add some humor to the presentation. Watering is a big, big part of maintaining your plants. And I just thought that this was pretty funny that, oftentimes when we have dogs, the water gets spilled all over the place. Well, someone was creative enough that they put their dog's bowl right on top of a house plant. So if there's any water, at least, dripped by the dog, that at least the plant is able to enjoy it. So we're going to talk, in addition to watering, we're going to be talking about fertilizing and pruning. And again, as I had mentioned in the previous slide, talk about kind of chronologically what would be done when. So the first thing we're going to kind of jump right into is pruning. This is a often discussed, often asked about subject. And here's 9 questions that I would recommend that you ask yourself before you start pruning. So, maybe instead of just kind of heading outside on a beautiful sunny day with a pair of pruners, just take a little bit of a step back and figure out why and, and what you're going to prune and things like that. So question number 1, I know it's really simple, but if at all possible, get this crucial question answered before you start pruning. What is the name of the plant? If you don't know the name of the plant, then I would encourage you to try to find out the name of the plant. A couple of resources for you may be to I know it's crazy as this sounds. There's apps on your phone that you can just kind of, download the app, take a picture of the leaf, upload it, and you may be able to get a name as simple as that. You could also, try to check out online. The University of Illinois Extension Service has a really good website that might help you out. I also like the Missouri Extension Service. I really like referring to their website. You could also contact a local garden center. This, again, this year's a little bit different. Maybe it's a matter of taking a picture and emailing them. When things change in the future, perhaps it would be taking some leaves into that garden center and asking them to identify that. Number 2, what category of plant is this? And what I mean by this is the plant a evergreen plant? Is it a flowering plant? Is it a perennial flower? Is it an annual flower? Just kind of figure out kind of in broad terms what kind of plant it is. Number 3, if the plant does have a flower, when does it flower? Does it generally bloom in the spring or does it not bloom into the fall? Number 4, pretty crucial question, has this plant flowered yet? Lilacs would be the prime example of this. Generally, lilacs would be blooming in mid to late May, maybe even into June. If you are pruning a plant in April, you walk up to it and you think, okay, we'll just take the lilac. So the question number 1, it's a lilac. 2, it's a flowering plant. 3, I know that, yes, it is a lilac. It does flower. When does it flower? Remember, you're asking this question in April. Well, this plant usually flowers in May. Number 4, has this flowered yet? The answer is no. I would encourage you to not prune the plant. Now, you can certainly prune it, but you're probably going to be cutting off a lot of the flower buds. That would, then it would diminish the quantity of flowers. In that example, will you kill the lilac because you prune it in April? Most likely not, but it won't have the quantity of flowers that it would have if you hadn't pruned it. Number 5, when is the recommended time to prune this plant? Again, we'll just use our common example of a lilac. The optimal time to prune that would be after it's done flowering and maybe late June, early July, kind of somewhere in that time period. In general, spring blooming plants can be pruned in the summer. Summer blooming plants can be pruned in the fall or even into the winter. Number 6, why do I want to prune this plant? Again, there's no right or wrong answers. I'm just kind of citing some examples. Do you want to prune this plant because when you walk up to your front porch, you have to kind of, dodge some branches because they're falling over onto the sidewalk? Or do you want to prune the plant because when there's wind, the branches start rubbing up against your house and you can hear it from your bedroom window? Maybe you want to prune a tree because the branches are starting to go over onto your rooftops. Again, just some prime examples. Number 7, when was the last time this plant was pruned, and or when do you plan on pruning this plant again? Some situations where this might occur is let's just say it's an evergreen shrub, and you just pruned it. Say it's mid-May and you just pruned it in mid-April. Does it necessarily need to be pruned a month later? Or if you're thinking, okay, it's mid-May, I just pruned it in mid-April. When do I plan on pruning this again? Maybe you can wait a little bit longer and prune it in July after it has a nice flush of growth. Number 8, what do I want the plant to look like after I am done pruning it? I'd really just kind of maybe take a step back and visualize what shape you want before you start pruning it, just to kind of have an end goal in mind. This would be particularly appropriate for trees. Just check their shape and structure. Number 9, what amount can I safely prune off and minimize the likelihood that the plant will look awkward or die? If we take To answer kind of maybe that second portion, uh, rarely have I seen plants that just outright die because they're pruned. I know oftentimes I hear, the person that lives in the house with me pruned it and then it died. Oftentimes there's not a cause and effect like that. Sometimes it's just a coincidence that it was pruned and then it died. Um, as far as how much you can safely prune off, if it's a shrub, maybe we can go back to that lilac or even forsythia. If it's a taller shrub, usually you can prune off about 1/3 of the height of that shrub. Um, and then the plant could still look pretty full. I would also, though, pay attention. There's a phrase, will the plant look awkward? That would be also important to consider when you're pruning evergreen shrubs. Generally, um, evergreen shrubs, I would say, can be pruned inches as opposed to feet, because oftentimes if you prune too much of an evergreen shrub off, you're going to prune back to those bare branches. And that's when, actually a plant may not recover a real severe pruning or will certainly look awkward for several years. I talked about a couple of these examples in the previous slide, but we'll just read through them pretty quickly. So for flowering shrubs and trees, they should be pruned after they're done flowering. So lilacs, forsythia, viburnum, crabs, they can safely be pruned when they're done flowering. Evergreen shrubs typically can be pruned either early in the spring or summer, and some examples, the arborvitae, juniper, spruce. Shade and ornamental trees, they're ideally pruned during dormancy, and that would be examples like maples, birch, elm. To be honest with you, we've done pruning, pretty much spring, summer, and fall. If there's, certain branches that are maybe growing over a sidewalk or growing over your house, I haven't, seen a tremendous amount of damage by doing that type of pruning if the plant was not in dormancy. But perhaps any large scale pruning, you'd want to hold off until they lost their leaves. This is the ideal way to prune. So if we look at the example all the way to the left, that 45-degree angle, this 45-degree angle is right above the bud in what's called the internode area. Ideally, you'd want to do this pruning cut, and the rest of the 4 examples are examples of incorrect pruning. And I apologize. The one on the right is an example of a good cut. So the difference here is this can have alternate bud where there's just one bud on the left, and then there'd be another bud normally up here. And this is an example of a shrub or a tree that would have opposite budding, and then this is a good cut in that case, whether it's alternate or opposite. I absolutely love this screen because it sort of predicts the future when it comes to pruning techniques. So if you start here on the top of the left side of the slide, it shows you what happens over a period of time when a tree is pruned correctly. So if you start up here, top left, this is a tree that needs to be pruned. So the question is, how do you prune it correctly? The correct method of pruning this tree is to go in and sort of thin the tree, but purposefully and very selectively trim out specific branches. You're not trimming the whole, like the example on the right, you're not trimming the whole tree at a specific height, but you're trimming selected branches to achieve an overall much smaller height. Obviously, there's a big difference between the picture in the top left and the picture in the middle left. After the tree has been purposefully but correctly pruned, this is the end result, and I think all of us would agree that this is a beautiful, beautiful tree. It's pretty thin. It's on the bottom. You don't have a lot of lower limbs there. It's limbed up or it's branched up, and it's got a nice full head. Unfortunately, this is more of the exception rather than the rule, but it absolutely should be the rule. On the right, this is an example of the improper pruning method. The pruning that has been done is someone has chosen in this example to pick a particular spot, so many feet off the ground, and just prune every single branch all the way across to achieve that particular restricted height. This is the result after that incorrect pruning is done. And then if we kind of, think through to the future, then this is the result after this incorrect pruning. I see this, unfortunately, a lot in the area, and it's just I'm trying not to be real judgmental, but it's just a little bit frustrating, because I know if pruning is done correctly, what is possible. So I would encourage you, when possible, try to achieve this. That being said, pruning is really an art form, and it sometimes is difficult to get it right. So when possible, try to aim for this column on the left as opposed to the column on the right. Again, some just really general kind of recommendations as to what to prune when, and this as this pertains to perennial flowers. So in the spring, if the foliage of perennial flowers looks good after we've made it through the winter, I would just leave the foliage alone. If the foliage though is brown or is it died back, then I would gently kind of rake it, or maybe just even cut it or pull some of that foliage to kind of refresh it. In the fall, I would do the same thing. After we've had a couple of hard frosts, say mid to end of October, I would take a look at the foliage on your perennial flowers. If the foliage looks okay, just leave it alone. If the foliage, though, has really kind of brown or died back, I would gently just kind of rake or cut it back. Foliage that typically looks good on perennial flowers in the fall. Some perennial geraniums look good. Coral bells often look really good. Helleborus look good. Those are some examples of things that you can probably leave alone in the fall. You just want to be a little bit careful about cutting the foliage too far back. You want to make sure that there's enough of the plant left so that it can leaf out the following spring. One example of that would just be Russian sage. Try not to cut it too far back. And in the example of Russian sage, I'd probably not cut it back more than to about 6 inches above the ground. I'd leave at least 6 inches on top of the ground. For ornamental grasses, generally those are left up during the winter, and they're cut back in the usually mid-March, although not a lot of us are outside in our yard doing work in mid-March. So I would say certainly by early April, cut that down to about 3 to 6 inches above the ground. Some homeowners prefer to cut their ornamental grasses back in the fall, just so they don't have the kind of the blades blowing through the yard during the winter. Just know, though, that no matter when the grasses are cut back, whether in the fall or the spring, certain grasses will start leafing out pretty early in the year. Other grasses, you really don't see them leafing out until, maybe even mid to late May and into June. It all varies depending on whether they're a cool season or a warm season grass. Watering. This is a tough one, and there's lots of different kind of ways to water, and I'm just going to try to give you some ideas of how to water efficiently, save your money, protect your plants, and of course be respectful of your time. So here's a couple of water saving tips for your garden. We'll try to run through them as quickly as possible. So the first one, keep the soil evenly moist. Water more seldom, but then thoroughly. So instead of watering a little bit every day, you probably want to water a lot, and then kind of back off a little bit and then water a lot again. water late in the evening or early in the morning. Typically early in the morning. Watering late in the evening can sometimes leave too much moisture on the blades, whether it's of your grass or, of your plants, and then lead to disease. Keeping with that kind of thinking, if possible, remember to water the soil, not necessarily water the leaves of the plants when that's possible. And then make sure to water in the correct quantity and water only the plants, as opposed to, if you're watering and you're seeing a lot of water end up on the sidewalk or your driveway or even running into the street. Just, kind of be very cognizant of that. Number 5, give larger water quantities and parts. I think of that often when I'm watering my annual flowers and pots or even hanging baskets. So I'll go through and I'll water everything once, and then I'll really let that water kind of soak down for a few minutes, and then I'll start all over again and water everything again. Soil and plant roots do need air. So it's important not to overwater, because oftentimes if you're really waterlogging that soil, it's really detrimental to the plants. When possible, really amend the soil with peat moss and mushroom compost to enrich that soil. And then number 8, this is probably the tough one. Water as much as necessary, but as little as possible. The idea through good watering is that you're helping the roots, you're helping the plant establish a really strong root system, so that over time the plants will seek out water on their own. So you don't want to constantly be watering the plants so that their roots are just kind of happy where they are. You want to train them to kind of seek out that water and grow for that, go and grow towards that water, so that over time, especially with trees and shrubs, you won't have to supplement water them, especially by that second year, third year, as long as we're not, in a drought. The plants should have a strong enough root system to support themselves, and you won't need to continue to supplement water as much as when the plants were younger. So we've talked about pruning, we've talked about watering. Now we're going to kind of move into another maintenance chore, which is dividing perennial flowers. What dividing is really just kind of taking a section of an existing perennial flower and planting it elsewhere, kind of dividing up the plant, keeping one portion of it maybe where it was originally planted, but then replanting other portions of the plant somewhere else in your yard, or maybe give them to a neighbor or a relative. The reason behind dividing plants is that really perennials tend to crowd themselves out, and they will oftentimes, like in the case of daylilies, they will start flowering less and less. Iris sometimes will also start flowering less and less if they are not divided. Just some benefits. Free plants. Who doesn't like free plants? They'll bloom more, as I said. Oftentimes, ornamental grasses really start dying out in the middle if they're not divided. I visit with a lot of homeowners, and I've just kind of heard some theories, my ornamental grass is, kind of dead in the middle, that, maybe a bunny has been laying there, or a deer, or, just various, reasons why there's kind of that empty hole in the middle of the grasses. Really, it's because the ornamental grasses have started to die out and they need to be divided. There's lots of information there about dividing. Really, it's, you just kind of chop the plant in half or 2/3. And this is just a great visual. These are some hostas. You can see that they've dug the entire kind of clump of hostas out. First, they chopped it in half, then they chopped it in quarters, and then it's a matter of replanting the plant. You can certainly, take a whole clump of, whether it's a hosta or a daylily or ornamental grass, out, or you could choose to leave a portion in the hole and then just dig out what you're going to be transplanting. This is some kind of detailed information about transplanting the plant. First, you're going to want to dig the hole the same depth as the root system. Make it about 1.5 times as wide as the root system that you're going to be planting. Place the plants in the hole, backfill with the existing soil, plus some mushroom compost and peat moss. And this would be true even if you're planting a new plant. You really would want to make sure to amend the existing soil with peat moss and mushroom compost. Number 3 describes something that we also call kind of the walk of life, where you either with your fingers or maybe even with your foot, just kind of tamp down that soil around the crown of the plant to make that good root soil contact. Cover the area with about 1 inch of a hardwood mulch, and then water thoroughly. These are some examples of when things are typically divided. Under springless hostas daylilies. Honestly, I think you can divide those just about any time of the year, and they seem to do just fine. Ornamental grasses, dividing in the spring tends to be much easier, just because they've died all the way back to the ground. Whereas if you would try to divide an ornamental grass in August, it might be 3 or even 5 foot high. Summer, usually kind of mid-July is a great time to divide iris. And then things that you could divide in the fall include like bleeding heart, veronica, peonies. To move on to mulching, I had said in a previous slide that typically around the newly divided plants, you'd want to spread some mulch. There's a whole series of advantages. Mulching helps to suppress weeds. It certainly does not kill weeds, but it will help to suppress them just a little bit. It also helps to insulate the soil. It acts to conserve moisture in the soil. Mulching also mulch tends to break down over time. So part of that is kind of enriching the soil, providing nutrients into the soil, which also in turns improves the soil structure. Mulch also, for some of us, is really kind of a pleasing kind of finished look to the landscape. This is another great visual about mulch. You kind of take the bed on the left or the plant on the left and compare it to the plant on the right. So if we take the plant on the right first, this is just kind of a nondescript perennial with no mulch around it. The sun is really beating on the soil. Moisture, unfortunately, is being lost out of the soil due to evaporation. The plant starts to wilt because of that moisture loss. And then when rain does come, it really kind of tends to splatter and do some erosion. If you take a look at the example on the left, where there is mulch there, the mulch kind of acts as a little bit of an insulation to keep the sunlight from directly hitting the soil. Mulch does break down, and that's why oftentimes you need to refresh the mulch. I would say at least every other year. As it is breaking down, it is adding organic matter into the soil, which improves the soil structure. Mulch also, on this example to the left, helps in erosion a little bit, although certainly I've seen mulch erode many times within a planting bed, especially if the downspout, the water from the downspout, is within that planting bed. That's where I see the most of the erosion occurring. And then this is just an example of a newly mulched bed. Usually around perennial flowers, you only put about 1 inch, and then shrubs and trees 2, and I would say more towards 2 inches, sometimes up to 3 inches, but usually 2 inches is the norm. Fertilizing your plants. There's a couple different types many different types of fertilizers. Quick release versus slow release. The names say it all. Organic versus inorganic, and water soluble versus granular. This is a little bit more information about when to know when to know to fertilize, and then kind of what fertilizers you may want to consider. So annual flowers really are heavy feeders. They will kind of soak up all the fertilizer you can give them and reward you with, bigger plants and lots more flowers. So if you are growing annual flowers, I would encourage you to keep them well fertilized. The easiest way to do that is just use a water soluble fertilizer like Miracle Grow and apply it when you're watering. I would say even consider applying that Miracle Grow every 3 weeks, maybe even according to the package directions. But just kind of keep that fertilizer from the time you plant the annuals all the way through until the first frost. Lawns also benefit by a water soluble fertilizer. Um, and then you can use granular fertilizers certainly during the fall as well. This is a section on weeding. A couple really, if at all possible, kind of prevent the weeds from growing in the first place. We talked about the fact that mulching absolutely helps that. Also, what helps that is really planting a selection of good plants within your planting beds. So if you have, say, a planting bed on the side of your home, not that you want to overplant it, but at least keep a nice, healthy group of plants there, and that those in amongst themselves will help to suppress the weeds. Other things that will help to suppress the weeds is if you're open to it, sprinkling Preen. It's a pre-emergent herbicide that really prevents even those weed seeds from growing before they germinate. In addition to Preen, I would consider applying the one that's listed here called corn gluten. It's an organic pre-emergent herbicide. So Preen is the chemical version. Corn gluten is the organic version. Your good old fashioned hand cultivation, just getting out there and weeding with a hoe. There's a couple of other items listed here. Broad spectrum generally refers to a broad spectrum herbicide that has the potential to kill anything that it is sprayed on. So if you do choose to use a broad spectrum herbicide, be very, very careful about where you apply it, and of course, read the directions and apply it only according to the directions. If you have an area where you're just having a really tough weed problem, or maybe things have gotten a little bit ahead of you, or out of hand, I would consider using landscape fabric, but I wouldn't necessarily consider that as the kind of the first way to get rid of weeds. But consider it as one way. If you have something planted there that's maybe really aggressive and you're having a hard time getting rid of it, a landscape fabric, put down right, will certainly suppress those weeds. As far as other help controlling the weeds in your yard, I would encourage you to contact the Kane County Extension Service, and you could contact them regarding weeds or really anything else that you have. And then here's their address and their phone number listed. What the Kane County Extension Service is, it is a service that is available to gardeners as well as homeowners, and they offer help on a wide variety of different topics. It's just a great resource. Now we're going to get into the portion of the presentation that kind of takes a look chronologically. So we've taken kind of a step back and looked at pruning and mulching, different gardening tasks. But now we're going to get into what could you do in April, May, all throughout the year. I'm not going to read every single slide, but I will definitely emphasize a couple of items that are listed throughout the slides. So in April, one thing that is often done is just to, honestly, as simple as it seems, I would encourage you to just take a walk around your yard. In all reality, I know in my own yard in April, I may not have walked around my yard much for probably 4 or 5 months. So really just get out there, take a walk around and evaluate, what do you like, what do you don't like, what do you not like, and what might you want to change. Another thing that is often done in the spring is to dethatch your lawn. The purpose of that would just be to get kind of that old thatch or the old ground, the grass clippings up and out of your lawn to help your lawn grow a little bit more lush and thick this summer. In May, welcome to May. One of the things that I would encourage you to consider is treating for Japanese beetles. So before Japanese beetles are kind of flying around in our yard in the adult stage, they're actually in our lawn in the grub stage. There is a product called Milky Spore that can be treated, can be used in your yard to kill the grubs before they become the Japanese beetles. So that's something that you may want to do in May, just proactively. The other thing that you could do is if after everything has leafed out, if there's still some bare branches or some dead wood on shrubs or trees, May would be a good time to consider evaluating that and pruning that off. June. Welcome to June. One thing that you might want to do is anything that bloomed in the spring. If you think it might be getting too tall or too wide, June would be a great month to do that. So I'm not saying that just because you have a forsythia planted in your yard and it's done blooming in June, you have to prune it. It's just that if you don't like the height or the width, now is a time that you could prune it. The other thing that you might want to do is just be on the lookout for any insects or plant diseases. And if you are concerned, then you could reach out to that local extension service. I know I had mentioned the Kane County Extension Service. There's also one in McHenry County. And no matter where you live, either McHenry or Kane, you can reach out to either office. July. This is where you're going to want to just take a good look at how you're watering your plants and be as efficient as in watering your plants as possible. Remember to water near the base of the plants. If possible, water in the morning and do kind of deep, thorough soakings. The other thing that you may want to do is take a look at some of your perennial and annual flowers and deadhead them. What that means is you're simply taking a kind of a sharp pruners and pruning off any spent blooms to encourage them, if possible, to bloom again. Working into August, I would encourage you to kind of think about the fall as a great time to plant. Think about what you liked about your yard, what you don't like about your yard, what you might want to change, and just maybe doing some research on the computer or through a couple of gardening books and plan. Take a few hours, maybe one afternoon, and just kind of plan ahead. Working into the fall, into September, um, so by the fall, some of the annual flowers may be looking a little bit leggy, and it may be, time to kind of change out your containers. There's lots of things that look great in the fall. I think mums are kind of our go-to, but there's certainly other options. There's some fall black-eyed Susans that are beautiful. There's some asters. Of course, kale and ornamental cabbage look great into fall and actually even into winter as well. The series of calls that we always get in September are sometimes evergreen trees drop off their inner needles in the fall. If you see this happening, know that it's most likely perfectly normal. If they start dropping off the leaves kind of the needles on the edge of their branches, I'd be much more concerned about it. But those inner needles are just kind of an annual thing that happens. Heading into the fall, I would be really cognizant about making sure that your evergreen trees and shrubs have plenty of moisture around the roots going before the ground freezes. So not that you have to start, kind of drowning all of the evergreens, but just make sure, especially if we have a dry fall, that you give those evergreen trees and shrubs a really thorough soaking. Evergreens continue to lose moisture out of their needles, even in the winter. So when the ground is frozen and they can't absorb any more water through their roots, they're going to continue to lose water through their needles. So we need to make sure to kind of stock them up on water as much as possible. Fall is also a great time to prune any summer blooming shrubs, maybe that are getting a little bit too tall or wide. An example of that would be the paniculata hydrangeas or the cone-shaped hydrangeas. They often can benefit by some pruning in the fall. In November, I would be really cognizant of if you've had rabbit damage to shrubs in the past winters, then you may want to take some time and protect your plants going into this winter. Now, protecting your plants from animal damage is kind of a whole nother class that I will get into. But just know if you've had that damage in the past, consider protecting your plants again. There's also a note here about applying an anti-desiccant spray to evergreens. That's what I was talking about in the previous slide, that where evergreens can lose moisture out of their needles. An anti-desiccant spray adds kind of a waxy layer to the needles on evergreens and will help minimize that water loss or that transpiration. Into December, I don't know that many of us actually do this, but if possible, purchase a live Christmas tree. And then you can actually just, kind of enjoy it both inside and maybe outside. You can also consider just, going outside depending on the weather and maybe cutting a few branches, whether, they're from a red twig dogwood or maybe some dried hydrangea flowers that are still outside and kind of bring that inside and, decorate your inside as well. January, I don't know. I always often find myself spending a lot of time at home, just kind of settling in during the month of January. If you are, if you find yourselves having a lot of free time, maybe you can talk with a younger generation of your family and perhaps plant some seeds or talk to them about gardening, plan for the future spring. Just kind of spend some of the time nurturing the love of gardening uh, with a younger member of your family. Uh, February, generally the Chicago Flower and Garden Show is held every February. I would encourage you, if possible, to attend. Um, I would also encourage you to, if possible, get out and walk around your yard and inspect for that rabbit damage that I talked about a couple of slides ago. If you do notice any rabbit damage, I would encourage you to protect your plants, whether it's through a spray or just maybe you can like put some granules around the mulch to you're really just trying to um, repel the rabbits based on either their sense of smell or their sense of taste. In March, and I know this presentation is getting a little bit long, so I'm trying to hurry it up. In March, as we talked about, you can kind of cut down ornamental grasses. You could also, if you have any insects or insects on your plants, you could apply this dormant oil spray. A common example of that would be a mugo pine. I've started to see a lot of scale on mugo pines, and a dormant oil spray would be something that would kind of suffocate those insect eggs. That brings us back to the end of the presentation. And again, I appreciate all of your time. So to end kind of on a more positive note, this is a plant called Ariela Sun King. It is a golden Japanese spikenard. It is the perennial plant of the year. It is a plant that really adds a lot of brightness to kind of can add a lot of brightness to a shady portion of your garden. It does get a little bit of height though, so it make sure to give it as much room as possible because it can get up to 3 foot. I know we've talked a little bit about rabbit damage and deer damage a bit. This is one plant that is rabbit and deer resistant, so that has it going for it. So I apologize that I cannot answer any of your questions, but I sincerely appreciate your time tonight or today. There are going to be a whole series of gardening classes that I will be recording. I know I kind of glanced over the rabbit, resistant plants, but I will be recording another video on that topic. I hope that you've enjoyed the presentation. I really appreciate your time and wish you happy gardening.